Hello and welcome. My name is Carol Carter and I'm the founder and CEO of Global Minded. We are all about creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, rural populations, LGBTQ, however you can define diversity is how we define diversity. To get these individuals into the education, economic mobility, and leadership pipeline. We do that by connecting first into college and underrepresented students to role models, mentors, internships, and jobs. So for example, today, this is our STEM equity team. We have these sessions with Massey every single month with incredible people like the ones you'll meet today. But we also record these sessions. And so you can watch these or recommend them as content for your students and for your other faculty who really want to broaden their DEI awareness. So thank you so much for joining us today. And it's my pleasure to introduce Massey, who is the founder and CEO of a couple different enterprises. One is the Jekyll Foundation, another is A&M Innovative Solutions. And she comes from a very long and distinguished background in corporate. And one of the things we try to do with Global Minded is really build the bridge between academia and the world of work so that students and faculty can get a real sense of those practical and professional skills. So Toy, it is a delight to see you again. We gather here every month and are glad that each of you joining us today could make time for this. Toy, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. And more importantly, I'm so glad to be hanging out with this distinguished group of folk on this panel. Clearly are some real game changers. Their boots are definitely on the ground. They are involved in the community and are not just talkers about impacting change and increasing the number of students of color and women in the STEM fields, STEM disciplines, entrepreneurship, as you will have it. They are actually doing the work. And so you have on this panel this morning, and if you have not taken the time to read the flyer that has a more extensive background about each of them, take the time and click on the email link that each of them has placed into the chat room. I'm just going to give you a real brief overview as we move on so we can move into what we want to discuss today. So we've got Michael Fleming, and Michael Fleming and I, we first met. I was just taken, just blown by what his vision. It was huge. And that's when you were launching King Streets and you were already in partnership and working with the King family, the Martin Luther King family. You had identified demographically, logistically, that there were over 1,000 streets named MLK, and your mission was to increase the economic diversity in those communities, to bring those larger entities into those communities and to eliminate the food deserts and to make sure that our communities were actually populated with the Walmarts and the Targets. And I think at that time, you had just had a big win. Target had agreed to open up a store in a community that they had never, ever ventured into. I think it was Target at that time. Yeah. It was Walmart. It was Walmart. Yeah. Okay. So that meant jobs were being created and things of that nature. And your background obviously is in and of itself impressive. And we'll talk more about it. But, you know, you've got a military background. You've got you're a black belt, Six Sigma like me. So I'm actually absolutely always impressed by that. In the entrepreneurial space, I think you even work with venture capitalists of all kinds. I mean, you just got everything going on. So we'll talk about more of that as we thread this through this process. We got a short hour and all of us talk a lot. So, you know, this is my little spot right here. I get to do this thing. Next, we have on here Dr. Arnel Washington Cosey, the fabulous Dr. Arnel Washington Cosey, who has just been a trailblazer. I've known her many years, and she actually pledged me in Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She was a nice big sister, so I could say that. Her family fed me as I was going through college there. So Dr. Cosey has she's a product of 2 historically Black colleges and universities, Xavier being the first in the undergraduate, and then your doctorate program, an accelerated doctorate program through Jackson State, right? Mississippi.
Yes, that's
and
correct.
that was incredible. One of the things I want to make sure we talk about with Dr. Cosey as we talk about building that pipeline, she is the end stop. She has created opportunities in STEM for kids of color when she was the immediate past chancellor, vice chancellor at the largest community college system in the state of Louisiana, Delgado College there, and got that major $1 million grant from Chevron to start that STEM program there that allowed many first generation students to move into the STEM opportunities that a lot of times our students don't recognize. And now you're over at Kingsley, and that organization is absolutely impressive because they're targeting not only is the success of the first generation college student possible with support like ours, it is imperative that we also reach back and grab those parents and educate them and skill them so that we have 2 generations at least in that space. So I'm applauding you in that space as well. Then I have, you see that brain behind that big brain? That is Dr. Carolyn King. She is a psychiatrist. And I've known Carolyn long before we did this collegiate walk. I think I met you, you were a little freshman in high school, and I was in 9th, you were in 9th, I was in 10th. And you were just immediately my little sister. She went on to medical school, was in my brother's graduating class, actually. But the most impressive thing about Carolyn, she's always been boots on the ground, always been involved with the community. She was a medical student when she recognized the importance of getting students to embrace the possibility that they too could become physicians. And she founded Reach Out to Youth. And it's this amazing program that takes elementary kids through 4 years of medical school in one day. And in addition to that, she has published a series of coloring books that actually take you on her journey. And we'll talk about that when she herself was first met in kindergarten, wasn't it? When a teacher actually tried to dissuade you from pursuing becoming a physician. So that's going to be an interesting story to share in this space. It's called A Girl Named Curl, and it has since that coloring book has been published in 3 different languages, and it's getting ready to be published in Swahili as well. And so it's just amazing. And so I'm excited about that. And then finally and quickly, we have my fraternity brother, the grand Omega Melvin Stallings Jr., a forensic scientist. Amazing as that is. We don't have many people of color that go into the forensic sciences. He is not only the founder of a organization, Cyber Green group, that tags young people and young people of color in particular and pull them into very interactive activities to encourage them to move into the forensic sciences. He takes us all over the world. He's in Africa twice a year doing this same thing. And so we've got a real opportunity to talk about what happens in these spaces when young people who we looked like at one time wanted to go into these fields that and sometimes seem bigger than they are, and they are discouraged from that, either subconsciously, unconsciously, or consciously. And so Dr. King, in order to level set us, is going to take a few minutes to kind of define those spaces so we're all clear. Every time we talk about a subconscious bias and a conscious bias, we know what we're talking about. Go ahead, Carolyn.
All right, so you guys see this brain in back of me, right? And of course, I love the brain. All right. So this is, let's see how we're gonna situate this here. So this is the limbic system right here. Okay. And this part of the brain that is the limbic system, of course, I got a call right then. This limbic system is our unconscious mind. This is our id. This is our pleasure principle. This is that reptilian part of our brain that just goes on drive. Okay. My son has the worst timing in the world. Okay.
Is that conscious or subconscious? Okay.
That is, he's feeling that I'm having some anxiety right now. So he's connecting with my limbic feeling. Okay. That unconscious. Okay. So you can see where that is. Now, people talk about the subconscious, and I like to think about this part, this cortex, okay, this part up here, as our subconscious. These are our thoughts. These are the things that we've kind of been, experiences over the years that we've learned to interpret, right? We've had feelings about them, and then we've had thoughts about them. So that's, the thoughts are our conscious, our subconscious rather. Our subconscious ego is the conscious. And then the conscious, which is the very forefront of our development. That's after we've integrated all of those feelings and those thoughts. Now we get to make decisions. We get to make moral decisions. And those moral decisions are happening in the executive part of our brain, which is the frontal lobe. It's not finished developed until age 25. Okay, so sometimes we change our conscious decisions over time. And so as we're exploring those unconscious or preconscious biases that can come from trauma, generational trauma, things that we feel limbically from very early on, and we're processing through our subconscious, our experiences, our thoughts about our experiences, then we make decisions. And so one of the things we're going to talk about today is the relationship between the decisions people make about us and how they relate, which are those conscious and those unconscious feelings and those subconscious thoughts that they're having. So we've got to get them to understand that they can make different conscious decisions. People can make different conscious decisions. You may not change your unconscious bias, and your subconscious thoughts are going to take longer to change, but you can change your decision making and your behavior. And that's really what we're looking at, is helping people change behaviors. That's what this is all about.
And that's where I want to come in. Exactly. Because I'm going to read something to you all that, and then we want to talk about even some of the experiences we ourselves may have had. So a husband and wife team they've established, they both come out of the Ivy League school, university systems, and they're African American, and they have founded an organization called Ivy Planning, and her name is Janet Crenshaw Smith. But she says, raising Black boys, she has two sons, three boys, raising Black boys in a competitive, predominantly white and Asian community meant arming myself with parenting skills to address unconscious biases. Our sons had the same raw skills that every child enters school with, the same potential to be molded and shaped by the world they encountered. Yes, my boys were tall, physically fit, but that didn't mean they wanted to pursue careers in football and basketball at the expense of excelling in mathematics, English, and science. I noticed some teachers made assumptions based on their look and put them in categories of less than academically. And that happens to our kids constantly. I want to ask each of you to kind of share maybe an experience at some point in your life where it could be something related to academics, or it could be, as we talked about before, walking down the street and some woman, usually white, clutches her purse and pulls it to her because her that would be the subconscious, right? Is saying, I'm not safe. You present a threat. There's a stigma, and that stigma is usually attached to skin color and how we look as we approach. So I'll start with Michael. Have you ever had some of these experiences that clearly you were predefined without invitation and without introduction?
Ooh, the list is long, so I'm trying to figure out which one is a story. I grew up in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Memphis, Tennessee. My mother literally was a teenage mom. She had 4 kids by the time she was 22, and it was in the early 70s. So they had started busing, and they bussed us out to the equivalent of a private school. It was and so it was on the campus of Memphis State University at that time, and so we were the kids who got off the bus. We wasn't the kids who got a ride to the school. The other kids, they treated it like a private school. And I distinctly remember those first 3 or 4 years, the teachers kind of ignoring us or not paying attention to us and that kind of thing. Well, yeah, my mom was all about education 24/7. And so I had to learn in spite of, that the fact that there was never any preferred attention that we were given. And a lot of times she would, the various teachers would call on other students in the classroom because they didn't think we knew the answer. And yet, we had studied hard. We probably, matter of fact, and I mean, it played out over years. I mean, it was that I think around the 4th grade or something like that, they considered me an advanced student. They bumped me up a grade and that kind of thing for the majority of my class. I think there was like one class they didn't put me up, but the teachers never really acknowledged it. It was just simply the testing that eventually validated that obviously we knew a lot. And part of it too was, and this is just being honest about it, is that just as you were saying, I was always a slightly taller, bigger kid, that kind of thing. So that already had its own internal issues and things that we looked at. And then so that played a heavy role. And I have to admit, because I grew up in the inner city, I knew Ebonics very well. And so this is just the hard truth. I brought up in a bad neighborhood. I knew how to curse before I could spell. And so and so part of it is that you kind of get a sense of that thing of always being pushed back. But probably the more tragic part of the thing that never stopped. I mean, that was elementary school. And so my mother remarried my stepfather. He gets in the Air Force. He was a captain in the Air Force. And we moved to Idaho. I literally moved from an all-black neighborhood to Idaho, lived in Idaho for 3 years. And
that was a real shock.
Which is significant to what Carol was talking about earlier about the brain components, and every bit of what she was saying. I was like, you know what? I specifically can remember those moments to understanding how your worldview changes. And that's very significant, right? My little corner of the world was, 4 or 5 streets in Memphis, Tennessee. And here it is that I traveled traveled across the country. But the wonderful thing there was the school was on the base. The bias came more from my friends and people who had not been exposed to Black people, because there was only about 6 Black kids in both the elementary school and middle school, and 3 of them came from my family. And so, so you quick, but the thing about it there, because we were on the base, science was just a natural thing to be part of and talk about. And I was always genuinely a nerd in regards to those things. And then my stepfather ended up getting assigned back to the South. We ended up in Marietta, Georgia. And the first day, my counselor had the option to take grades from one of the other states numerically, or she could take the alpha grade of it. And she chose to adjust my numerical grade, change my GPA in less than 30 minutes, took it down. And then, I mean, it just got worse from there. The teachers in classrooms in the South, they made a point to sit us in the back of the classes. They literally, this was middle 80s. They set us in the back of classes. I mean, all that kind of things. And so, it just never relented. It never relented. There was no passageway out of it, to the point of, and again, I didn't join for this reason, but I joined the NAACP when I was 19, and come to find out that counselor, who most people, you normally don't see your counselor more than 30 minutes, and for all 4 years that you're in high school, she had been doing that all across the board and had been having a ton of complaints. I ended up being one of the people that when the NAACP filed against her, they ended up getting her removed. So imagine the years that she was there, and just from the counselor to the classrooms to all of that, and yet my parents did not know how to react to that. So yeah, but like I said,
I think that's part of that's part of, that's the tools that I'm hoping when we wrap up, we can give to some of our parents that are listening, or some of the enlightening that educators who might be on board here can hear and take away. Because if they're one of the most powerful and impactful influences on a child's life is the educators, the teacher in front of them. Melvin, I want to thank you for that, for sharing that, Michael. And Melvin, can you share a little bit? Can you hear me?
You said again, I didn't hear you.
Oh, I was like, yeah, can you share a little bit, maybe your own experience in some of these spaces as you moved into the sciences? And so you did, you had engineering background as well?
No,
It was all
I'm
forensic.
all forensic.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, trying to get into the forensics field was quite a challenge because there's very little minorities in forensics. One, two, my goal was to go to medical school, and I prepped for medical school all the way through undergrad, graduate school, and then maybe last semester, I changed my mind about medical school. And I had an FBI agent come in and talk about the field of forensics. And this person guided me through from undergrad all the way to actually, you need to go to Baltimore City. They're hiring forensic scientists. This would be a good place for you to grow. And that opportunity right there was a great leeway for me. But while I'm working in Baltimore City, the workplace was quite different. Understanding that I was the youngest guy on my unit. We had a couple of minorities on the unit, but for my first 3 years, all holidays I had to work, you know, and just understanding the culture and dealing with the culture was an eye opener for me. Coming from a small town in Virginia to Baltimore City, was quite different, but the learning experience was quite, it was good. It was great to understand the difference in, I guess, understanding that a lot of times I had people in my ear saying that you're gonna have family members, you're gonna have friends that would tell you, you know, the forensic field is not for you because there's no minorities in that realm. But this is why I have a great passion for STEM now because of that. You know, I look at kids on the elementary level, you know, as an educator, our kids don't get science on a regular basis in elementary school. They get math and language arts.
Yeah.
And that's the push, you know, in order for us to really make a change and make a difference, we got to go into our elementary schools.
But you know what? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, finish.
You know, really try to get these kids to love and have a passion for science and for STEM, you know, because a lot of times these kids are in elementary schools. They don't really get a grasp of science till middle and high school, but they already, you know, math and science is hard. It's too challenging for me to go into those fields. So, you know, and then individuals are telling them this also. So this is why it's very important that we have these conversations, very important that we continue to push our young people to understand that they can be scientists, they can be engineers, they can be doctors, you know, and this is why this is so important.
One of the things and that's been the mission of the Jekyll Foundation, to embrace what we call the uninitiated child in order to change the face of technology forever. The one thing we do when we go in there is to tell them, you've been a scientist, you've been an engineer all your life. You know, if you were working with Legos and building structures, you were doing construction engineering. You were doing, you know, civil engineering as you were building your little cities with your little pieces. I tell them, if you're in the kitchen with your mom and you're turning up the flame in order to have the pot, you know, boil, and if it's over boiling, you're turning down the flame, that's thermodynamic heat transfer. You're an expert, you don't even know it. It is the association of the activities that they're doing naturally. Right. And letting them know from the beginning, you're doing science, you're doing it. So this is not new to you, it's not foreign. I'm gonna bring Dr. Cosey on, who has a son and who has a grandson. And that little grandson of hers is forever building and with his little hands and putting stuff together. And already they're telling them, all right, you're an engineer. All of our programs, we call our kids doc. But that is the thing. Thank you, Melvin, for that. And Dr. Cosey, if you would talk about, you know, just with Justin and now Justin's son, how, you know, you had to navigate those spaces.
And part of that thank you, Toy. Part of that comes from me listening to people like Toy and our brother down here, Calvin Mackey with STEM NOLA, who sees that in kids and has been able to make that relationship for us. So when I see my grandson doing those things, taking activities, and I'm taking videos and sending them to Toy, and she's encouraging me and telling me what he's doing. I understand exactly what Melvin and Toy are talking about, because what I see in Emerald, that's my part, my grandbaby, what I see is no fear there. It's fun for him. And so my job is to continue making that fun and to encourage him to keep moving in that area. So we have blocks everywhere. We have all kinds of sticky things. And we will be taking him to activities and introducing him to all of the things that Toy is doing through the Jekyll Foundation, so that when he gets to the class, he's just applying something that he's been doing, that he loves, and just putting some principles and another foundation to it. So I thank everybody, people like Melvin and Toy, who has put that in my mind, planted that seed in my mind. He's already doing it. And Toy knows I have a daughter who would have never thought about anything science. And she just recently started her own business. She's making lip glosses. And Toy had to make me realize that's STEM, right? She's developing her formulas, she's creating colors, she's doing measurements and whatever to take the shade down. That's STEM.
Yeah, and it's so important as I'm looking at some of the comments that are coming in the chat room, and I'm hearing in my heart just, because I'm hearing it's like they do this to the girls too. They do it to the girls the same way, and sometimes even worse, because there's this discouragement, what I call the unconscious discouragement, when there's no evidence that girls do poorly in math or worse than boys in math, but if they hit if they hit a gap, they're not encouraged to just work through. They're usually told it's okay. It's okay. It's math. I hate math too. And all of those types of things. One of the things that I think inspired Dr. King, and she can tell you herself when she started Roddy, and she's very intentional that program start in elementary school, and that those kids, and because I'm trying to see how we develop it and take it into the middle and the high school grades, but she is adamant it has to start in the elementary schools, and it's got to start soon. Carolyn, talk about your own experience in that space. And talk about a girl named Curl and how that happened.
So it's not funny. It's not funny what happened when I was in the first grade. So IQ is one of those things that is, you're kind of born with it, right? But it can be enhanced or diminished, right? Your light can be, your flame can be brought up, or it can be shut down, and your choices will reflect that. So, at age of 3, I had announced that I was going to be a doctor when I grow up. So by the time I got to the first grade, I was 3 years in on this plan. In my mind, in my first grade mind, I'm 3 years into, being committed to be a doctor. So I'm in the first grade, and my first grade teacher says, all the doctors over here, the nurses over here, the firemen over here, the police officers over here, and, a couple other teachers here, and, maybe 5 groups or so. So I take myself, because I'm 3 years in on my track to be a doctor at this point. I go over to the doctors. I'm probably the first one sitting in the pile, right? And she comes over me and she says, "Oh, Carolyn, don't you want to be a nurse? The nurses are over there." And I looked at her. I was so disgusted. I was insulted. I was disgusted. I was disappointed in her. How could she question what I already knew? I mean, isn't she an adult in the room, at this point? And so I looked up at her and I said, no, really, I've known since I was 3 that I'm going to be a doctor. And I think the way that I said it with such conviction, she realized that she had done something terribly wrong by making that mistake. Nothing's wrong with being a nurse if that's what you want to be, okay? If that's what you want to be that. But that was not what I had decided to do. Again, going back to that conscious decision, she was working on her unconscious bias and working on her subconscious thoughts about gender roles, right? And I had consciously made a decision at 3, of what I wanted to be. And so that, as I shared that story with people kept saying it over and over again, like we're hearing in the room here. And so that's how the book A Girl Named Curl evolved. It's about that story, and then the pursuit of what you intend to do.
You know, one of the things in my household, my story is similar. I was 7 years old. I was standing on a stool with my hands laced in latex, those Playtex gloves, and I was reaching into the sink and pulling out from the cavity of a chicken, a whole chicken. Remember, they used to wrap the gizzard, the heart, the liver, the neck, and I was pulling it out, and I associated that with childbirth. And I remember asking my mother, you know, what kind of doctor does this? I'm 7 years old, and she told me that would be an obstetrician, and it's usually aligned with gynecology. And from 7 years old up until we got to our junior year, sophomore year in high school, Carol, I was totally going to be a physician, my brother and I both. And so my mother made it a point to put us in anything. We could do anything that was character building. If it was somebody's party, they was just having, my mother would be like, you know, well, what's the party for? Well, it's for, it has no purpose. So no, you're not going to be there. And I'd say, everybody going. And she said, well, not everybody. And so, you know how that goes. But the point being, and just to bring it back around, in the 10th grade, I met Kenneth Hill. And he had just launched the Detroit area pre-college engineering program. And he came to Renaissance. That was our high school. We were the first graduating class out of there. And it was all academics. And they had picked what they believed were the top kids around the city of Detroit. And so it was him that introduced me to this idea that I could not only do engineering, but I could do engineering and medicine. And so even from that point, everything was, I'm gonna be a medical doctor and an engineer, you know. But again, somebody's in my ear and planting those seeds in my household, where I'm coming from, my parents, they're nurturing that. When Kennedy was little, my daughter, who's now 18, you all know, when she was a little thing, just like you, Carolyn, they'd say, what are you gonna be? And Kennedy's agenda was big. I'm gonna be an engineer, I'm gonna be a doctor, I'm gonna be a lawyer, and I'm gonna win American Idol. And she could name those first three because she was associated with doctors and with engineers and with attorneys and with educators. And so she could see it, so she could dream it. And so as we're talking about this, and I'm looking at some of the questions and the comments that are coming in, how do we support our parents and let them know what it is that is necessary? And using and leveraging systems that are in place, like the ones Michael is building, the ones Melvin is building, and what you're doing, Dr. Cosey, to help arm our kids against that bias. When somebody says you're not going to be, so they can stand up and say, yes, I am. You know, I told you all when I was going to engineering school, finishing physics, it was a nun who told me she wouldn't write my letter of recommendation. She said, I never recommend you for engineering. Why not? What did she have to lose by writing a letter of recommendation for me? Don't miss a beat. You know how we are. We'd like, okay, that's her problem, not mine. I'll get a letter, you know. And so we go ahead. Melvin, you wanted to say something?
I was just elaborating what you're saying. Everything you were saying is just so true, you know. And again, you know, I'm so happy that we're here, and we got to continue to push forward. And like y'all say, you know, some of my colleagues that I work with, they are females, and they just tell me their stories and tell me the stories about how, like one of my colleagues, Aisha Bo, a company is called Stemboard. She talks about her story about as an African-American female from Bahamas, and she talks about how she had problems with math and wanted to be an engineer. So through the trials and tribulations, she's an aerospace engineer now, owns her own government contracting company, but her story is so powerful. Mm-hmm. And it just makes me really want to go into these schools and these community centers and really touch bases with our minority kids and tell them, that, if I can, they can, and show them individuals who look like them and give them stories so they, every child needs a mentor. Every adult needs a mentor, because no one gets to the top by themselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I can add to that too, I think one of the things I'm thinking about as you say that, and I think about students that I dealt with for so many years when I was at the community college. I think it's a couple of things. It's what happens in the classroom. And so we had talked about that as a group, how important it is for them to see people who look like them, that they can believe, just what Melvin just said, that they know that they are already there. There are people in those places there to support and encourage them. I think it's early on, it's the exposure, again, like what you're doing with the Jekyll Foundation, because they have to know what the possibilities are. They have to see these different careers. They have to know what they mean. You know, I'm old enough to remember that everyone around me coming up as a little bitty child, all my parents' friends were in education, school teachers, principals, or they worked at the post office. It's a whole nother world right now for our kids and these babies that we're serving, and they need to see all of these possibilities. So introducing them early on. But the other part that I really want to add is about how important it is for us to have honest conversations with these kids, right? So when they see people like all of us and they see all those letters behind our names, they make an assumption about who we are or what our lives have been like. And I think it's important for us to sit and share with them. As I told you guys, when I started Xavier my freshman year, I had to take a developmental math, right? When I applied to go to grad school, I'm not even going to begin to tell you what the numbers were for my GRE score, but yet here I am. Here I am with the PhD behind me and doing what I consider to be very well professionally and contributing to my society, feeling fulfilled, feeling happy, supporting other people. If we don't talk to these young people and tell them that everybody isn't a rocket scientist, wink, wink, like Miss Massey over here, you still are smart, right? That not to get tied into those number grades and those letter grades. Talk about the courage, talk about the drive, talk about the grit, talk about finding someone, as Melvin just said, who is a mentor and can support you and push you through all of that. We got to be honest with these kids, with these young people about what how our trajectory rolled and what battles we fought, and not just in school, but personally, to know that it's okay when you got problems at home. You can go through divorces, you can have spouses and parents, or all of that. It's just the tenacity and the perseverance to push through, which is in us naturally.
And we got to keep going. I remember when I was hired by Detroit Public Schools to go into one of the worst schools in the worst districts. I'm stepping over kids, walking into the door, they shooting dice, playing cards, and they coming into my math class, and I said, well, okay, the mathematicians have arrived. And they said, I hate math. I said, boy, I saw you throwing dice. You are a statistician. Don't tell me you know what I'm saying? And once you start to talk like that, they start, really? I'm like, that's all math, what you doing? And then to have, I had students who had parents who were incarcerated and in the system. And I said, where's my homework come Monday morning? And they said, I didn't have it. We had to go visit my father. He's in the prison. I'm like, how far is, what prison? They tell me. And I said, that's 2 hours from Detroit. And that's 2 hours back. You have 4 hours to get me my homework. See, I didn't focus on that part that he had been, or she had been allowed to leverage to make an excuse for not being successful. And that's why kids of color need folks that look like us, because we see through all the crap. Don't come at me with that. We don't feel sorry for none of that. We are perseverers and we keep going. Our parents sometimes can be some of the worst adversaries in that space. And I know you see it, Dr. Cosey, and you probably, Michael, in some of those spaces that you're building, and that cyber thing too. I want to talk about that. How do we encourage our students to seek out somebody? It might not be your mother, it might not be your father, but somebody who is willing to stand by you and breathe in your ear and tell you the only difference between that A student and that D student is level of effort. How hard are you willing to work? Talk to me.
I want to jump in on that too, and then especially on what Dr. Cosey and what Melvin was saying as well. I mean, and I love the part about the brain piece that Carolyn has shown. But you know, our biggest quote we used to say all the time: "Smart is not what you are. Smart is what you do." Having an understanding of that, you've got to commit yourself. I love that. I love that she's doing it. Absolutely. And I can't wait to even talk to you more about some of the things we got around that. But we did mentoring, you know, boys mentoring for years, and I've trained a ton of organizations on on the techniques and things that we use. And so I used to go and get stacks of popular science magazines. And I mean, every class, every workshop, it didn't matter what other topics it was about. we would bring those popular science magazines. We would let the kids take them home. We would walk the single mothers through it and help them understand why it was necessary to have them in the house, because we kept trying to think of ways to have something that after they left us, it extended to the coffee table in their homes. And so then we would literally describe what we call, and I mean, it's some real basic application things. When you were talking about the parents thing, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to extend the kind of lessons that we were trying to teach the young men in our mentoring sessions, so that they can understand with their parents. And to the point of that, we came up with this thing called the grocery store experience. We tried to explain to them that the average grocery store is built for the average woman's height. We tried to explain why they separate the fruits and vegetables from one side. We could teach everything about science simply by teaching about a grocery store.
Wow.
Exactly. We wanted them to be able to go to the store with their parents and be able to understand those kind of things. We wanted them to understand how the dollar exchange their parents was doing was all part of science. But I tell you, I got to back up to one little question that we could ask that would identify how much work we had to do with a young person and even adults at some point. And it's a times table question, believe it or not. If you ask someone what's 7 times 8, that was the hardest timetable question to answer. And if their parents stumbled through it, we knew then at that point they didn't understand timetables. And if they didn't understand timetables, they weren't going to understand it for math or science. So there was nothing else left for us to do. And so we got all these unique index card type of things that we put together to be able to try to get them to understand patterns and what they were doing. But you'd be surprised, because you would see the mom, because more often than not, it was a single mom. You see the mom off to the side, and I guess she was realizing for herself, she was like, I got to be able to do that for myself, to be able to do those things. So we were always looking for patterns of transference. And I can't help but throw this plug in there too. On the King Streets website, the King's TV originally started off as video mentoring. Our goal was, because we knew a lot of people don't have time to mentor, and so we actually have a little questionnaire thing for people to answer within 3 to 5 minutes, and then that way professionals like ourselves that may not have the time to be in the actual physical environment, that we might as well take these little moments of things that we've had experience with and make a little quick video, and then that way the kids can come out there and actually see people that have the same level of interest that they have. So I mean, there's thousands of stories of those type of applications, and but science has absolutely driven just about everything in my life. And so we always try to find some unique way for them to view it on their own. And even for my son, I bought him a little $100 3D printer, and that is the love of his in my life. and so I tell you,
making those connections, that
absolutely.
what they're doing, you breathe math, you
Absolutely.
live math. And because when the kids and the high schoolers especially talk about it, I said, well, here, I put up a number 1 followed by 4 zeros. And I'm like, if you don't understand the placement of this decimal point, 1.0, 1 0.0, 1 0 0.0, you have to remove the negative stigmatism that has either been imposed upon you or that you've allowed yourself to adopt, and it's keeping you from being your best self. I don't care what it is you want to pursue, but for keeping you from being your absolute best self. We don't have much time left, but I want to talk about, and I just appreciate you all. When there was a study that was done where girls, there were students that were going into one of 2 math classes. The instructor was either a male or a female. Both instructors wore the same T-shirt. It was the, Einstein formula E equals MC squared. What they found, however, is how the girls related in either classroom. When they were in the classroom led by the male facilitator, they were less likely to speak up, to ask questions. When they were in the classroom with the female facilitator, they would ask questions about the difficult math problems. They were less inhibited to seek the support. They then come back and find that it has oftentimes been men in positions of influence in their lives, i.e. fathers, who have discouraged them from going into anything that dealt with math. So as we talk about and getting around this closing up space, I want to hear how your programs, Roddy, Cyber Green, Arnel in the Kingsley Kingsley House, right? Kingsley
Correct.
House
Kingsley House.
Foundation. And of course, in the King Street space. How are you working with those people who are also influencers with children to help remove some of those natural tenacities to discourage them from going into things that, as we've already determined, they're naturally, have a natural affinity for, Carol, I hadn't heard from you in a minute.
Well, I'm over here. I'm digesting so much. I
Right.
knew this was gonna be one of those, one of those brain talks, right? So I know you had a problem with putting this brain on, but I knew this was gonna do this. Okay. So I'm sitting over here taking notes, and one of the notes that I took was the semantics of science. And so when Michael said the grocery store,
I'm blown away.
You see what I'm saying? My whole mind's blown. I put it in.
Blown away by that.
Okay, because the thing about that is not only is it STEAM, and I always say STEAM, I put the A in there because the arts are important. Before there is science, there was art. Okay,
Well,
so every science comes from an art. So psychiatry, okay, you think of it as an art, but neurology, you think of it as a science. Well, neurology came from psychiatry.
Right.
Okay, interior design, you think of it as an art, but architecture came from interior design.
So one of the things I'll say to you, because our friend Dr. Calvin Mackey, he always says STEAM, the A, is the bastardization of STEM, because those of us in the STEM fields understand the power of the arts. It's just automatic for us. So we never thought we had to designate it because we just knew it was there. You're absolutely correct. The arts.
But the problem with that is that the arts get cut first. Okay, and so the sciences are not, so it's so much stuff going through my head. So vocabulary is important. That's one. Semantics of sciences too. I had a conversation this morning, and we were talking about, that I was going to be on this panel and everything, and we just talked about how this, when we look at the pipelines, for example, okay, into science. So we started elementary and reach out to youth because, in my opinion, it's elementary to think about science. That's so elementary. So you got to start there. If a kid has a problem, you want to start early as possible. If they have a speech problem, you want to get them in speech therapy as early as possible. 3 years old. You're not waiting until they get to middle school and high school to correct their speech. All the damage has been done then. You know what I'm saying? So this is why I start with elementary school. So we're talking about this, and her sons were going off to college. Well, we're in COVID right now, right? So the problem is the athletes were able to be on campus, but the rest of them weren't. Now I'm gonna let that just marinate for a minute, okay?
That's what's happening right now. Is that what you're talking about?
Let's talk about right now, because
she's upstairs now doing her engineering classes. The athletes are at Howard right now.
You see what I'm saying? But this is a reflection of our society. We respect the athletes. We don't respect the academicians, because the logic is that athletes need to practice or else they're gonna get out of shape. Well, what do you think this is? What do you think that is? Okay. If we're not using that frontal lobe, learning those decisions, using that cortex to get fed, using that limbic drive to put it someplace necessary, because athletes are working a lot on this limbic and then just some motor stuff. Okay. Right. They're working on that muscle. Okay. We need people to get that it's very important. The brain is not a muscle, because if it was, we respect it like we respect athletics. Okay. We don't respect it, and we have to learn how to respect it. And then we have to really, I'm sorry, I got on my soapbox toy. You didn't want me to do it. I'm gonna stop there. Okay.
But no, what you're saying is is necessary, because it's all tied in, right? Our mental health, our emotional health, our social adjustments, our ability to cope. It all goes together, right? And so that's when we come into these spaces, and our kids are, who say, when they get to high school, I want to be a physician, or they get to middle school and they, they want to take the engineering extracurricular classes, and somebody else is telling them, no, you can't. And if they're not empowered, that brain has not been fed those pieces that reassure them that not only can I got to shut you down. My mother used to say, everybody can't go. Learn to shut some people out. And that's what we have to teach them in order to make that happen. Because bringing it all the way around, you talked about COVID. We identified during this time all of these disparities, as they say, you know, in medicine and health as it applied to people of color. When we also know that people tend to be compliant as a patient when their doctor looks like them. So if we're missing in those spaces, it's not by accident that I think we see the inequities and the disparities in the healthcare system. When I think engineering, and I talk to you all about, my biggest thing is Flint, Michigan, and the poisoning of that water. If there were more folks that look like us that would push back and say, you can't do that in my community, or in the communities where kids look like me, where the senior citizens look like me, that wouldn't happen. When airbags were first deployed, they were decapitating children and crushing chests of small frame women because no girls at the table to help with the crash car dummy design. It was based on a medium frame man. So our absence is felt. We just got to work to close that gap. We got a few minutes left. I want to give you all some opportunity to talk about what it is that you do in the communities that you're in, your availability to those that are listening today, and how we are here. We are grassroots and on the ground. I loved what Arnel said about letting them know, some of us came from single family households. That's why when I could go into those schools and kids would say, well, you don't understand, I had to do this and I had to go there. We're not impressed by none of that. I don't want to hear any of that.
So when I got in my limbic, I got a little distracted, but I just want to kind of pull it back to the point I was making with the athletics. So we have pipelines from athletics. We have rocket football. We have football in elementary, middle, high school, college. And if you want to be a pro ball player, you know how to do it.
Right.
Yeah. There are camps.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. If you want to be a scientist, it's not that readily available in elementary school to go to a science camp. And so to round that back up, that's why I reach out to you, focuses on elementary school. And then we tag on to everybody that then goes to middle. So like at Michigan State, they've got HSSI, which is middle and high school. And most diversity and inclusion places on campuses have that, have those programs. And then I'm done with that. Thank you. I just wanted to
I love it. Jump in. Let's see how, let's think solutions in this space, because we've got to create pipelines that discredit the ones that are already in place. We know about the ones that try to take you from ECE to prison.
So I'll add this, Toy, as we wrap up, as the non-scientist person, the wraparound support. My student affairs people would be upset if I didn't talk about this. I think that we're at a point in time now where education has to be reimagined, right? Everything is different. So cars aren't the same, homes aren't the same, furniture isn't the same, yet education is the same, almost. I mean, there are some exceptions. Education is the same just about as it was 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago. I think that we can't disconnect based on everything we've learned, particularly through this COVID crisis, everything we learn about how human beings function, how they operate, the disparities in our communities. We cannot ignore any longer what people are dealing with when they're not in that building and how it impacts learning. And so if we aren't willing as educators and people who are supporting education to wrap all of this stuff in, I saw someone in the comments mention ACEs, if we aren't willing to be honest about the trauma these babies are dealing with on a regular basis, even the trauma that the parents are dealing with, we can bring in community health navigators to the schools. And guidance counselors from 50 years ago ain't gonna do the job anymore, right? We need to deal with the real trauma and be honest about what's happening in these homes that we don't want to talk about, and in these communities and how it impacts learning. We need to deal with food insecurity. We need to deal with the housing crisis. When I was at the community college, I could almost cry if I tell you how many students I had coming into me who were sleeping in their cars. We had to shut down our buildings because we were finding students sleeping in our buildings overnight because they didn't have anywhere to sleep, because they wanted to be in school and get an education because they
You
saw
about to make me cry.
Oh, it's real, because they knew that being there was their path out of poverty. So they would stay and hide in the buildings. They would go in the gym to take showers before. If we don't want to deal with all of that and think that we can keep all these lines, then we're not going to make the progress that we're talking about. And let me wrap this up by saying that we can't shy away from saying that the majority of the students that I'm talking about look like your panelists, right? And so if we get in these positions, in these higher ed institutions, in these nonprofit agencies, in these foundations and philanthropy, and we want to just play the game and we're afraid of what people are going to think about us if we bring up racial equity, if we bring up what's happening, then get out the damn seat and let somebody else sit there because, I'm sorry, get out the seat, let somebody else sit there, because I don't believe anybody was put on this earth to serve themselves. If you are not here to serve your community and people around you, then you are misusing what God has given you. That's the enemy.
Amen. I think we can pretty much almost close on that. Michael, Melvin, you gonna add to that, Carol?
I think we also should look at making sure we do workshops, mentoring with our parents. That's huge. But in order for our kids to get to the next level, there got to be some mentoring, because we're in this cyberspace now, this virtual learning platform, and we do a lot of training for our parents, because what I've noticed is our kids cannot navigate on Zoom, cannot navigate on Microsoft Teams, but when you're looking, reaching for that mother or that father, they can't either. So we do a lot of workshops with that space, because what I'm trying to do now is really try to build that cyberspace and create a pipeline so we can have more students and minority students in cybersecurity.
But you're also dealing with those food deserts in those communities that comes right back around what Dr. Cosey was saying. If you're hungry, you can't sit and pay attention in the classroom. We address the symptoms. We see the symptoms. Oh, he won't sit still. Oh, she won't stop talking. Oh, but we don't deal with the sore. You know, she's hungry. They sleeping in class because they don't have nowhere to sleep when they leave class. You know,
Absolutely.
so you are dealing with that in some of your spaces. You're teaching them about, that's your green project, correct?
That's my green project.
Talk a little bit about that. Give me 30 seconds so I can move and let the other.
So there's a lot of food deserts in urban cities, and what we've done is we built greenhouses in the urban city and teaching kids about eating healthy. You know, high blood pressure, diabetes. We got to reduce that to keep our generation moving. So that's what we do in the green energy space.
Excellent, excellent. Dr. King and Michael Fleming, you all got the last few minutes.
Well, for the King Streets project, there are 1,000 cities that are named after Dr. Martin Luther King. And so our mission, we got 3 portions of the mission. The website is the virtual nation that we've in uniting those communities. But our entire passion and drive is actually to be physically in those communities. So we have a thing called the CARE Alliance. And the CARE Alliance I won't have time here, but it's intended to show how the infrastructure of a community can be rejuvenated and actually participate in the development of youth and families. And then also, and I know we won't have time for this one too, but there are of the 320 million people in the United States, there are 40 million people that need their GED. And here in the state of Georgia alone, there's almost 10 million people. There's 1 million people that need their GED. And so it's a quiet epidemic. And so we're not leaving anyone behind. So we're definitely going to take care of K through 12, but we're inclusive of the fact that there's a hidden education, need that's there. And so we're looking at everything for what it is. So I just wanted to kind of throw that plug in there. So if you get a chance, check out kingstreets.com. It's got that last S at the end, and hopefully we'll get a chance to share more with y'all in the future.
Awesome. Dr. King?
So, to your point about bringing the parents in, after maybe, 15, 20 years of doing Reach Out to Youth, we realized that the parents were kind of, even before that, we had to start developing parent programs that were going side by side with the kids while their kids were at the medical school. And then, fast forward, we started to mimic make the parents program mimic the children's program, so that when they get home, because these are elementary school students, their kids might know more than them. And they wouldn't know how to answer those questions, because we teach some hard stuff in Reach Out to Youth. We also teach them where babies come from, back to Toy putting those latex gloves on. Because kids in elementary school, if they don't know where babies come from, they're certainly going to say, let me see yours, I'll let you see mine. And that's how we get pregnancies, right? So we teach them where babies come from with real anatomical terms. And so we prepare their parents that this is what they're going to be talking about when they get home, in addition to some of the other ones. This year's for plug is Immunity in the Community at Michigan State University, Grand Rapids, Flint, and Lansing's campuses, but it's virtual. So the registration is available for anybody that has children elementary age to sign up.
I love it. And I know we're getting ready to wrap up. Dr. Rick Hyatt is on, and he said something that I think all of us can move from here and even talk about. He says, how do we meet them where they are and the issues in front of them? Individuals in those spaces offer opportunities to reimagine education. Nike is in front of us daily. How do we become Nike? I love that. How do we become Nike? And so that's our next charge. I'll be talking.
I think that is the month of February for Toy.
Yeah. So Carol, you want to close us out? Thank you so much, my distinguished panelists. I think we could talk about this another 30 minutes to an
I know
hour.
easily.
Yeah,
Well, you guys,
my chat.
Toy, you were amazing. And I just want to tell everyone who joined that Toy does these sessions every month with incredible people like this. And in the summer of 2022, she'll have like her posse of multiple thousands of people, but you can meet them all in person. Not this summer, we don't think, but in a year. And I just want to say, you know, one other thing to Michael's point about there are 40 million non-literate adults in this country, and we work really closely with organizations like CELED, Barbara Bush Foundation, because these are the parents of a lot of the students that are in our community colleges, or they're the ones that are struggling through high school. So it's all interconnected generationally, some of these different points. So anyway, it was a great panel and so wonderful to meet all of you. And we hope that you can share this widely, all of you who joined, with your networks, with the students that you work with, and also with your colleagues wherever you are teaching, that we can all work together, that these are resources that they and their students can see these remarkable people and be, as Toy says, at the table with them if they don't necessarily see this where they're going to school, and they need to see these role models and mentors. So.